do services, sometimes they have 40, 50 kids, and we have a children's message. Sometimes there's 40 or 50 people, and the average age is 80, so there's no children's message. But I always prepare one, and I like to start with a little game. So everyone close your eyes. My eyes are open, so I know if you're cheating. Pick a number between 5 and 10. On the count of 3, I want you to open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to guess your number because you don't have the same number, but that's how old you are. Good morning, children. Oh, good morning. Oh, how's everybody doing today? Yeah, it's a great day to be here and being in church. This is so great. Your families brought you today because you're all between 5 and 10, so none of you drove. We heard 2 stories this morning from the Bible, and the Bible's a library of books. And we heard one story from thousands and thousands of years ago from the Jewish history. And then we heard one from a couple thousand years ago from Jesus. And both of them talked about something. What were they? Miracles! I love it. Who has a favorite miracle in the Bible? Anybody? Lazarus! Is that the one where he drives a car? What's Lazarus? Oh, that's right. I remember now. When Jesus raises his friend Lazarus, who was dead for a couple of days, he was a little stinky. You guys remember that? Ugh. Any other favorite miracles? You guys don't have favorite miracles? Your parents are not doing a good job bringing you to Sunday school.
Blind man who saw again.
The blind man who saw again. Those are great miracles. There's a couple different versions of them. Some of them have Jesus spitting and making mud and rubbing in their eyes. Some have scales falling off. Those are pretty cool miracles. Yeah, what one? Oh, the loaves and fishes. Thank you. That was low-hanging fruit. That was a good miracle to pick. Wow, thank you. There are 37 different miracles that the New Testament in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell us that Jesus did. How many of them are in all 4 Gospels? Anybody know? The loaves and fishes! Oh, you guys are great. You were paying attention. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are like 3 students who all kind of cheated off one another. They're all looking at Mark the whole time, like, what did you get for number 4? So Matthew, Mark, and Luke's version of this story read almost identical. John was the weird kid who was off in the corner sniffing glue, but every now and again he had some great insight. So if anyone wants to pull up the version of this from John, it's in chapter 6. But in John chapter 6, John adds a wrinkle to this story that isn't in the other 3. Does anyone know what the wrinkle that John adds is? There's a character. There's a character in John's story that isn't in any of the others.
Was it the boy?
You guys are doing so great! In John's version of this miracle, a young boy shows up and has the loaves and fishes. This is my absolute favorite version of the miracle. I didn't want to read it this morning because I wanted to keep it a surprise. Thank you for your help. But it is my favorite version of this miracle, and it's my favorite version for this. Where did that little boy get those loaves and fishes? Where did that little boy get those loaves and fishes? That's a very naive answer. Now, little boys and little girls, where are you going to get loaves and fishes from? Mom and Dad. John's version of this story has a kid stealing his family's food and bringing it to Jesus. There is a radical miracle that I believe that takes place in this story, and I don't think it is some crazy quantum physics particle manipulation where suddenly we have extra, but this is what I believe happened, and I believe it to be a miracle on the highest magnitude. I believe that that little boy brought his family's lunch up to Jesus. And I believe that his parents were probably jaw on the floor like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You took our food. But in that moment, in that act of generosity, 5,000 men, not counting the women and children, 5,000 families' hearts were open. And each one who had been hoarding their own little loaves and fishes for themselves and for their crew opened up their stores and gave. And the 5,000 people that were there ate to their fill, so much so that there were still 12 baskets full left. What if our world looked more like it did that day out there on that plain? You know, us as pastors, we jump into stories, right? At the beginning of it, you heard me say, and then Jesus went. Well, the and then, the thing that had just happened was Jesus' dear friend, his cousin, his foreshadower in faith, John the Baptist, had just been executed, and he found out about it. And so when Jesus withdrew to be alone and feel sad, the crowds came upon him, and he didn't hide and just lick his own wounds and say, poor me. He went out and addressed the needs of the crowd. Great model to give. But I think that child, that act of radical generosity that happened that day, transformed the hearts of the 5,000 that were gathered there. They saw the fear that they had been living in of mine, this hoarding mentality that each of us are guilty of. Anyone have a 401k? Mine. We all live this scarcity mentality that there's not enough in the world, but guess what? There's an abundance. Part of my job, one of the things I get to do because of the flexibility I have is I work with my denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, here in the New England Synod, and I help churches that are in transition. Their pastors retire or resign. They don't know if they're going to keep open or close or merge or what they're going to do, and I help them to see what their futures are. And one of the big concerns almost everyone has is what? Money. How are we going to pay for it? We don't have enough money. I said, that is a lie. Each of your checkbooks has enough of the money, but not enough together. Now, this isn't a miracle story, but one of my favorite stories in the Bible takes place in the synagogue, and Jesus is there. And every time he's in the synagogue, the rabbis, the scribes, the Pharisees, the guys like me are always trying to get him, trying to trick him in some sort of way. And he sees this very wealthy man come and put a huge sum of money in the treasury and struts out. And everybody thinks, wow, that's a great guy. And Jesus points to this little widow who goes up with her 2 mites and puts it in the treasury. And no one notices that at all. But Jesus says, what? She gave more than he did. That little bit that she was able to give, those 2 loaves and those 5 fish were more than all of that money. That little bit given in the right spirit changes the world. My organization exists on a budget of around $400,000 a year to keep 2 Seafarer centers open, employ half a dozen chaplains, ship visitors, administrators to service the needs of tens of thousands of seafarers that come into New England every year. I cannot do it. I can't do it alone. I can't do it with 2 of me, 3 of me, 5 of me. I need my entire team, and they can't do it without each and every one of you. Now, if I were to ask for someone to give me the $500,000 or 400 and whatever thousand I need, maybe in all the years I do this, I might get 1 person. That's not what we need, and that's not what we want. What we need and what we want is the contribution of the many. Because I do this every month. I go around to churches and I share our mission and I say, we need your support. And every penny you give help, and every penny you give goes to help us help these seafarers. And everything you give, we're able to do this amazing work. And every year I am blown away that the call is answered by over 100 congregations throughout New England, by over 5,000 individual donors, some who give as little as $2. And my $2 donor and my $50,000 donor have the same weight in God's eyes. They're a gift. They're a gift that allows us to do our mission. So what is our mission? I'm glad you asked. You're great. Again, we have in New England a long and rich tradition of seafaring folk come into our community, and for this to be a backbone of our entire economy. How many of you heat your homes with fuel oil? Not as many anymore because there's some good solar things, whatever, but how many of you put gas in your car? No? Oh, all electric and all, okay, good. Guess where that stuff comes from? Comes from Canada, comes from a boat, It comes every other day. There's another ship coming down to fill up giant tanks in Portsmouth or in Portland or in Chelsea. And we go to the gas station and we don't think twice about it. But without the brave men and women who risk their lives day in and day out to get on a boat to bring that stuff to and from, we wouldn't be able to heat our homes or drive our cars. How many of you have an iPhone? How many of you have a smartphone? How many of you have a telephone? Guess where that came from? China, with parts made from all over the world. And how did it get here? On a boat. How many of you have Amazon Prime? How many of you have ordered something in the morning and had it show up at your house in the afternoon? Guess how it got there? By a boat. It took them 3 or 4 weeks beforehand to get it to their warehouse, but that stuff didn't just magically show up at the Amazon warehouse so it could be at your house in 6 hours from when you push that button. We live in a society that is full of miracles. We are so interconnected. It is amazing, but we don't think about it. Anyone have a can of corn in their cupboard right now? No? None of you have a can of corn? In your cupboard right now, that can of corn you have, regardless of what store you bought it from, there is a greater than 50% chance that that corn was from in India. Came over on a boat. America, the great Midwest, our corn belt, and we will have in our shelves in Minnesota cans of Indian corn that came over on a boat. We don't think about it. Look at the person next to you. Pull your collar back. Look at where your shirt was made. Bangladesh, probably. India. Everything from the shoes on our feet to the products we put in our hair to the food we put in our bodies comes to us because brave men and women have decided to sacrifice a year of their life to serve it at sea to transport our goods and make our lives possible. These brave men and women literally risk their lives on a daily basis to make ours so simple, and we don't even think about it. Every day in the United States, seafarers from all over the world are here delivering automobiles and fuel oil and the salt we put on our road. Did you know the salt we put on our road actually comes from Turkey? You didn't know that, did you? And the salt ships that show up in Chelsea full of salt to the brim will unload all of that salt, those big giant white and black mounds you see covered in plastic. That's road salt that comes from Turkey. And then they'll move down the river and get filled up with scrap metal. And they'll take that scrap metal to East Africa where it's melted down and then sold back to us as bulk steel. And these seafarers are just one chain in the cog moving this stuff around. And we do not think about them at all. When these guys show up, they've been away from their homes for months at a time. Some of them have the ability to communicate, most of them don't. And when they get here, they hold in their hand the most amazing and yet useless piece of technology you can imagine, a cell phone without a SIM card. For those of you who don't know what a SIM card is, it is about the size of your pinky nail. It is a tiny little chip that if your phone doesn't have an eSIM capability without this tiny little thing, you can't talk to a network. And your cell phone is useless. And so with the funds that we are able to raise, we are able to provide SIM cards to these seafarers so that when they show up, they're able to call home. SIM cards doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but if you went back and looked through the 1970s, my budget, my organization's budget, we spent $100,000 a year on stamps. People want to communicate with one another, right? One of the first ships I got to go on, it was amazing. The crew was from India, 100%. And the rule on a ship is if there is an international mix, they speak English. If there is one nationality, they will speak their native tongue. So I show up on the ship and nobody spoke English. Everybody spoke Panchid, and they spoke like 3 different dialects, and there was interpreters among each other because they didn't even speak the same dialects, and one kid who was interpreting for everything. And so I'm helping this older gentleman, by older I mean like 35. I'm helping him get his SIM card set up, and as we finally get it done, he's over here, we're on to the next guy here crying behind him. And I turn around and this guy is in tears. And I get up and you ever try to comfort someone who doesn't speak your language? It's next to impossible, but you just be there for him, and I come and I put my arm around and he turns, and he's not sad. His entire being is lit up, and he turns his phone to me, and there's his 4-day-old daughter. And then 10 minutes later, I hear him weeping even more violently, and I turn and look, and he's FaceTiming them, and he's hugging me and my chaplain and showing us, his wife and his daughter and his mother-in-law, and we're celebrating with someone literally on the other side of the world. I got to be a part of it. It's one of the highlights of my career at this job, and I got to be a part of it because you guys support this. Because it's a ministry that nearly 200 years ago, the churches here in the Boston area in New England saw how important it was. Now, it's not always fun. Sometimes the things we do are awful. We had a ship in Portland over the summer that had an explosion in the engine room. And the engineer, a young man named Dinesh, probably should have died. He made a decision in the moment to save his shipmates and his ship at the cost of himself. And he sealed himself in the compartment, secured the fire, and he burned himself over 80% of his body, and he should have died. He spent the next 6 weeks at Maine Medical, and my chaplains were there literally every day with the hospital chaplains. I was in every state and federal senator, congressperson's office, phone call, every person I could get a hold of for the next 2 weeks to make sure his family had visas so they could get here and be with him. And when they were denied, and I'm making contacts and calls to the State Department, I'm able to do all of this work. I'm able to lean on our lawyers. I'm able to leverage this huge network because we've been doing it for so long with the support of churches like you. And after 5 or 6 surgeries and finally getting strong enough, Dinesh is back home, and we still talk to him about every other week. He sends us a WhatsApp message with pics about what's going on in his life and his family. We were able to hook him up with the union to make sure that the company wasn't shorting him out of what they owed for him saving their ship. We advocate for these seafarers. We are their friends. We love them like brothers. And we do it because Jesus Christ calls us to do it. Jesus says, at the end, there's going to be this division. And on this one hand, there's going to be a bunch of people that Jesus is going to say, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. And when I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. And when I was naked, you didn't give me any clothes. And when I was sick in the hospital or in prison, you never visited me. And these people are going to say, what? Jesus, when did we see that? When did we see? We never saw you. And Jesus says what? When you avoided helping the least, you avoided helping me. And then to the other side, he's going to say, when I was hungry, you fed me. And when I was naked, you clothed me. And when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And lonely, you visited me. And equally confused, the other side goes, what are you talking about? When did we see you? We never saw you, Jesus. And he says, when you did it for the least. When you did it for those that society has said is less than us. When you did it for those that everyone else turned a blind eye for, when you did it to them, you did it for me. That's why we respond. We respond because we see the face of Jesus in each and every one of these seafarers. My favorite thing that I get to do for my job starts about late October and goes, it still happens now, is I get to be Santa Claus. I get to show up with all these goodies, all these ditty bags, all these great knit hats that your knitters so lovely make. They're beautiful. And I get to hand them out, and I get to watch this amazing interaction. And then I get told things like this from a crew that is 100% Hindu. Thank you for bringing us Christmas. One of my favorite Bible stories is Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? That's a Bible story. We had a hat this last year that had, I kid you not, 48 different scraps of thread that were made to make this knit hat. It was glittery and, it was the most hideous thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I had to get this close to breaking up a fist fight over this ugly hat by 2 seafarers that thought it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. Because they knew that somewhere, some grandma was sitting there knitting this with love. And that, wow, someone might see it as hideous. They saw it as this amazing gift. Every time we show up, they're so happy that we're there. We're not there for a motive, right? Like, we have the Jehovah's Witnesses that show up with us. They're there to sell. We're there to serve. We're there to be their friends. We're there to be their allies. We're there to be their advocates, to be the hands, the feet, the voice of Jesus to these men who desperately need it. Some of the crews we deal with are going through some of the worst things you can imagine. Toxic leadership, owners that haven't paid them for months, basically indentured servitude, slaves at sea, without a voice, sailing under national flags that don't care about them at all. Thankfully, because of our organization and the countless organizations like ours, we're able to report and shut those things down immediately. It's pretty amazing. I have the power with like 1 or 2 phone calls to make sure a ship doesn't leave a port. If there's something shady going on, I can call the Coast Guard and they're like, nope, you're in port until we figure it out. I can call the ITF if there's a payment issue, if there's an issue with them not having enough food or enough water. We had to buy bottles of water for a ship because their desalination plant was down and the owner wasn't providing them with water. Imagine being on the ocean, surrounded by water and none to drink because the owner is too darn cheap to fix your desalination plant. One phone call to the International Trade Federation representative, and that ship did not leave Portland until it had a working desalination plant. Right? Without us stepping in, being a voice for these voiceless in our society, they're going to continue to take it. I told the board when they brought me on about 2 years ago, I have one goal. We are 197 years old now. I want to be here till we're 200, and I don't want to be the last director. I am the current director of Seafarer's Friend, and I hope that there are 200 years of successors after me. My job is to steward this amazing organization until the absolute last person has to get on a ship to make my life easier. When the seafaring industry is 100% automated, when you go on a cruise and there's not a single staff person, it's all AI robots, I'll hang up my hat. But until that day, my organization will be there, being a friend and a companion and an advocate for every last seafarer that steps foot in New England. These men are invisible, but to you they are invisible no more. Our lives are as easy and as luxurious as they are because there are people in this world willing to sacrifice theirs to make ours a little bit nicer. Next time you order something on your phone from Amazon, next time you're clicking something through, or God forbid you ordered something and it's still not here in 4 weeks because it's in shipping. Take a moment to think of the brave young men and women who are risking their lives, who are abandoning their families for months and months at a time to make this possible for you. Now, I want to ask you to give me some loaves and some fishes. Not asking you to give, again, if you have it, put me in your will, give me $500,000, give me $1 million, give me $10 million. I'll take it and I will do great things with it. But what I'm asking you for is a loaf or a fish. $20 or $25 if you can afford it, $50 if you're feeling really generous. This is one of my most prized possessions from our organization. This certifies that Mr. Jonathan Newcomb, by the payment of $50, is a lifetime member of the Boston Seaman's Friends Society, signed September 12th, 1832. We've been around since 1827, so I have a few that I missed, but this is our oldest one. Anyone want to know what $50 in 1832 is worth about today? $3,000. Our first run as a society, our first batch of life members, we had 300, each give $50. That's the equivalent of $900,000, almost $1 million. Our budget hasn't changed. $50 doesn't go nearly as far as it used to, but luckily for me, I'm not asking 3 congregations in Boston and in the suburbs. I'm now asking 300. So I'm going to ask the same thing that my forebear asked almost 200 years ago, is if you have $50 to give to support my organization, I would be greatly appreciative of it. If you have $20, I'll be greatly appreciative of it. If you have $1, I'm going to be equally as appreciative of that dollar. because every one of those loaves, every one of those fish that all go into the bucket add up to what we need to feed all of these seafarers. And I'm 100% sure that I'm going to get everything I need. It happens every year. As a parish pastor, we'd be freaking out every October, November, like, oh, the budget. And then Christmas comes and, oh, the budget. As the director of a nonprofit, every quarter I'm freaking out, oh, the budget. And every quarter a grant comes in, or a gift comes in, or a bequest comes in, and the budget. God provides. He has for 200 years, for 2,000 years, and will continue on. I thank you all for your generosity. I thank you all for the gifts that you've given, your time, your talents, the knitted hats and scarves, all the love you have shown and will continue to show to the seafarers that make our lives possible. Thank you for supporting us and our mission. Thank you for helping our ministry, and may God continue to bless you and this congregation. Amen.